The art of professional wrestling possesses a uniqueness unlike any other form of entertainment. The unmatched variety of action, the abundance of creatively rich talent, and the endless supply of unforgettable rivalries all combine into something truly special. With that being said, the ability to stand out is crucial. For All Elite Wrestling in 2019, that importance multiplied. Launching a brand new North American wrestling company in the 21st century was already a monumental challenge. And in order to maintain that momentum, the compelling storytelling was essential. But at the end of the day, no matter how talented your creative team might be, the amount of bright ideas that exist behind the scenes, none of it matters if the performers themselves cannot bring those ideas to life in the believable manner. Fortunately for AEW, that was never the problem. Since its formation in 2019, some of the most athletically gifted wrestlers in the world found a new home in All Elite Wrestling. And while many individuals played a major role in the company's early success, today we focus on the E of AEW, the Elite. At the end of 2018, business was booming for the seemingly inseparable group as they prepared to launch the company's very first event. But just 3 years later, Kenny Omega would sign the contract for his world title match against Hangman Adam Page, using the blood of his former Elite partner. Today, we relive the deeply emotional story that led to that moment. From cracks beginning to form within the Elite to the rise of AEW's arguably most important storyline ever, Kenny Omega versus Hangman Adam Page. As of 2026, Adam Page is the definition of a vibrant character with multiple sides to his personality. On one side, this is the man who is referred to as the heart and soul of the company. On the other hand, as he has showcased over the last couple of years, he is more than capable of being a violent man who will destroy just about anyone who happens to find themselves between him and the AEW World title. Things, however, weren't always this way. In 2019, without much history to his name, it is easy to admit that his character wasn't the most compelling one. His background consisted mostly of being one of many Bullet Club members who was easily overshadowed by the names of Cody, Adam Cole, Tama Tonga, the Young Bucks, and of course, Kenny Omega. Now, fast forward to All Elite Wrestling, and all he had was his cowboy gimmick, which, at the time, besides providing him with somewhat unique ring gear, wasn't giving him much life either. But then, without wasting any time, Hangman started writing his own story. The main event of the inaugural All Out pay-per-view had a decent amount of buzz behind it. In stark contrast, the headliners of the show were complete opposites. On one hand, Hangman, a man who had never really experienced the main event scene before, represented the future and seemed like a very fitting inaugural world champion, given how suitable his persona as champion would be for a company that claimed to do things differently. On the other hand, there was a multi-time world champion in Chris Jericho, your typical WWE guy, someone the fans didn't want to see lead the company that was supposed to represent a new beginning for the industry. With that being said, Page had a fair amount of pressure on him. Beating the WWE guy in Jericho and becoming the first world champion in the company's history was something the audience expected from him. The locker room was rooting for him, and the fans in the arena and all around the world were doing the same. It was time for Bullet Club's Dark Horse to make a name for himself on the big stage, and he failed. That was the beginning of AEW's most notorious redemption story, one that would last for more than 2 years, and it was anything but straightforward. Having found no success as a singles competitor, Page had to pivot, and that's how the team of Hangman and Omega was born. The two would go on to become the World Tag Team Champions, which led to something paradoxical. Kenny Omega, one of the biggest superstars in the company, and a guy who was no stranger to being the main event star, seemingly had no issue participating in tag team action. While fans expected him to lead the company as the brilliant singles competitor that he was, he found comfort in competing alongside his elite teammate. At the same time, Adam Page was quietly, yet progressively, transforming into something bigger. In contrast to Kenny, he was anything but content. At the very start of their tag team journey, Adam's ego was already creating a divide between the two, with fans already anticipating Omega versus Hangman, but the time for that match had not come yet. Regardless, throughout 2019, Hangman constantly felt like the least important member of the Elite. While Kenny Omega was viewed as the best wrestler in the world, and the Young Bucks were legendary tag team specialists, Hangman was the insecure, less experienced performer trying to prove he belonged beside them. And that loss to Jericho only made matters worse. If that wasn't enough, his loss to Pat completely altered Page's mindset. This story marked the origins of Hangman's drinking issues, where alcohol became both a coping mechanism and a shield. The drinking wasn't simply a comedic trait, it symbolized avoidance. Avoidance of failure, pressure, and his growing fear that the Elite never truly respected him as an equal. The more isolated he felt, the more he drank. And the more he drank, the more isolated he became. Little did the fans know, but the celebration that took place after they won the tag titles served as subtle foreshadowing for what would happen the following year. Hangman, who was unhappy to see the Bucks appear and had zero interest in celebrating in the ring with the rest of the Elite, immediately opted to hang out with the fans instead and, in classic Hangman fashion, drink a cold one. The Young Bucks were, of course, playing a big part here. Just like Kenny, they took no pleasure in seeing their friend indulge in alcohol. Their constant attempts at redirecting Hangman to the right path only made matters worse, with Page progressively distancing himself more and more from the people who were trying to fix him. The story, however, is deeper than that, which was once again brought to light during the Revolution 2020 program between the Champions and the Jackson brothers. The erosion of their relationship was put on full display during the interview featuring both teams. As Page stated, he wasn't taken seriously by his own peers, referring to how, just a few months earlier, he had vowed to leave the faction, which the rest of the Elite had simply ignored. The Bucks, however, had had enough, and went full blast on Hangman, stating that they had turned him from a Ring of Honor jobber into a natural star. Under normal circumstances, these four would have had a lovely chat. Here, however, the interview was abruptly ended because Adam's glass was empty, which was more than enough for him to stand up and leave behind the people he had not so long ago considered his brothers. Now, while the champions retained the gold during their fantastic pay-per-view match, the story was far from over. Even though Hangman now held a win over the Bucks, it didn't ease his pain much, but rather gave him just enough confidence to formally exit the faction. In reality, however, his ties with the group weren't fully cut just yet. During the following months, despite the Elite's efforts to fix things, it became even clearer that nothing could change Adam's vision. Not even the vision, but rather his desire to break out of the faction where he was seen as the inferior one. Things reached their boiling point on the August 27, 2020 episode of Dynamite, where Page was the one to cost Matt and Nick their #1 contenders match for the tag team titles, the very titles still held by Hangman and Omega. Enough was enough. And after the match, the Bucks couldn't hold it in anymore. They went straight to Page, serving a hard, cold truth. Maybe all Hangman Adam Page had become was a drunk letdown who was afraid to have one more match against one of the best tag teams ever. More importantly, he was afraid of having his titles taken away by his own friends, who he already viewed as superior to him. After telling him exactly what they thought of him and officially kicking him out of the faction, the viewers were left with an iconic visual of Hangman looking at himself through broken glass. Here, we saw a man at his worst. He was running out of friends, and all he had left were his insecurities, booze, and a title that soon would be taken away. All Out 2020 was the last nail in the Elite's coffin. After being pinned and therefore losing the tag titles, in a very fitting shot, Adam was seen lying on the canvas, looking at the very thing that had caused many of his recent shortcomings. Finally, Kenny had had enough too, and instead of catching his comrade's fatigued body, he simply let him hit the canvas. Now, without any fancy words, Hangman Page truly had nothing more to lose. He let his emotions and the alcohol take over his mind, and in the process, lost the very few people he could have called friends. He hit rock bottom, which meant there was only one direction left to go: up. For almost a year, he had been his own worst enemy. Now, he had to face his own demons and be honest for once. In his emotional post-All Out interview, he publicly admitted that losing his friends and the tag titles was nobody's fault but his own. Meanwhile, in his own interview, Kenny recognized that his relationship with Adam Page had eroded to the point of no return. He also highlighted his own desires and dreams in AEW, which were to go back to what Kenny Omega does best, being an absolute menace in singles competition, which leads us to the next part of this story. Whether you love or hate AEW, there is no denying of how much buzz the announcement of its launch in 2019 caused in the world of sports entertainment. And even with all the positive feedback the product was getting early on, one major weak point you couldn't ignore was their main event scene. Specifically, it consisted of only a few superstars like Jon Moxley, Cody, Chris Jericho, and of course, Kenny Omega. That being said, these four had a lot of weight on their shoulders. The audience expected a lot from them. Jericho, Moxley, and Cody has all delivered being a major stars early on by consistently participating in major storylines. Two of them were the first two world champions, and Cody, despite formally being a member of the Elite himself, were shining as a singles competitor in his own unique way. Now, on to Kenny. After only half a year of company's existence, he became a part of tag team division. The move that was understandably criticized, especially at first. I mean, out of 4 of them, he was the only non-WWE guy. Somebody you would think is the perfect face for the company which claimed to be an alternative. Instead, the huge success that his wrestling persona achieved in the years prior AEW was arguably watered down to the point of no recognition. From the vibrant Bullet Club leader, he somehow transitioned into the character that, well, had really no character. He was of course still a stellar of a performer, but besides that, all he was doing was consistently trying to bring Hangman to his senses. That, ironically, has significantly raised the stock of Adam's character, while doing no good to Omega. Now, as we mentioned in the end of the previous chapter, in the fall of 2020, Kenny has made his way back into the singles competition. All seemed right again in the world, but for him, this run started on a rather bittersweet note. Jon Moxley was on a dominant run as a world champion, and what he needed the most was the worthy opponent. Tony Khan said bet, and the idea of a tournament seemed like a good enough way to determine somebody who deserved such an opportunity. One of many things this company has been doing right since its early days is the tournaments. And while this one isn't necessarily the greatest tournament ever, it surely gave us an all-time final. Here, there was much more on the line than a shot at the World Championship. And as much as being a champ meant to both Omega and Page, given the year-long story they had by Full Gear 2020, this was a deeply personal one. It was all or nothing for both. If Hangman loses, where does he go from there? How is he going to deal with yet another destructive loss? Kenny, on the other hand, was on the comeback of his life, and losing to someone who, let's admit it, he saw as lesser than him would cause irreversible insecurities of his own. After putting a one hell of a performance against one of the best singles wrestlers ever, the verdict for Hangman was written. Adam Page's own weapon in Buckshot Lariat had betrayed him after he failed to hit it 2 times in a row, which allowed Kenny to capitalize, hit the one-winged angel, and that was all she wrote. That was the very much needed ending to their 2020 story that was, in fact, done right. Given all his star power and recent momentum, Kenny just couldn't lose. And for Page, it was the beginning of his year-long redemption arc. Similarly, Kenny Omega now had the opportunity for redemption himself. If we look past Full Gear 2020, his last pay-per-view singles match had been a 38-minute war against Jon Moxley at Full Gear the year before. In what was, for the time being, his farewell match from singles competition, he had suffered a very important loss that no doubt left a sour taste in his mouth for quite some time. Now, he had the chance to avenge that loss. Not only that, but also to make up for his almost year-long tenure in the tag team division, which he clearly saw as a waste of his greatness. But there is one popular saying that seemed to alter Kenny Omega's mindset in late 2020. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Did he really have a chance at beating such a dominant champion as Moxley, who on top of that had already beaten him once? In the weeks leading up to their match, Omega's morality had already begun to deteriorate, even though that wasn't perfectly clear to the audience at the time. His entrances, which included a cleaning crew, would have seemed bizarre to fans who didn't know any better, but those who knew even a little about Kenny before AEW knew exactly what was going on. That, however, proved to be only the tip of the iceberg. The gentleman's agreement that Omega had promised for their title match was thrown out the window once Showtime arrived. And even Mox, who was already overly suspicious of Omega's intentions, couldn't see what was coming. It turned out that, just like many of us, Kenny wasn't satisfied with himself at the time. He needed that world title to feel whole again at any cost, and that cost was aligning himself with Don Callis. If turning heel and completely altering the main event scene wasn't enough, the post-match segment included the historic announcement of the AEW World Champion heading to Impact Wrestling, which would go on to play a major role in Omega's historic belt collector run. 2021 is widely considered to be one of the best years in AEW history, and one of the reasons for that is on your screen right now. As good as Moxley's fighting champion run was for early AEW, in this industry, vibrant character work performs best, and the return of the cleaner was the way to go. Omega's entire AEW heel run possessed a special beauty because of how much his 2021 character contrasted with the babyface Kenny Omega we had known in AEW. His ventures in Impact and AAA made it one of the most important runs in modern wrestling history. The subject of this video is, of course, the Elite as a whole, and as significant as Kenny's entire title run was, it deserves a video of its own. What matters here is how perfectly AEW had now set the stage for the epic Omega versus Hangman rivalry. Friends who had once taken on the world together were now worlds apart. All the failures Adam Page experienced throughout 2020, combined with the momentum he had built with the all-elite wrestling fanbase in 2021, made him the company's biggest underdog babyface. On the flip side, Kenny was taking the wrestling world by storm, finding enormous success across multiple companies while once again leading a dominant faction. Speaking of factions, it now seemed like Hangman had a group of people he could rely on as well, which is exactly what we'll start the next chapter with. In 2021, Kenny Omega was the belt collector. The Young Bucks were dominating the tag team division as world champions. On top of that, they had each other, along with the Good Brothers. If Hangman were ever to plan his redemption against Kenny, he knew he couldn't do it on his own. Back in the summer of 2020, Brody Lee saw something in Adam Page. He saw a broken man who needed true friends. Page, being as lost as he was at the time, declined the offer to cooperate with the Dark Order. What was started by the late Brody Lee was carried through the rest of 2020 and well into 2021 by the rest of the group. While during the initial offer he received from Brody in July 2020, the Dark Order was the type of faction a guy like Adam tended to stay away from. Later in the year, they transformed into a completely different type of group that now consisted of a variety of clearly defined personalities who had one goal in common: to recruit Hangman Adam Page. The complexity and inner struggles of Adam Page were already seemingly peaking during his elite exile. What is fascinating here is how many more layers would be added to this story with the group you would think couldn't possibly have any chemistry with Page. That has famously turned out to be the exact opposite. From the classic being the elite bits to the on-screen pursuit of Adam Page, the Dark Order managed to make the story of Adam Page even more emotionally deep. However, it seemed like no matter the amount of fun they had on BTE or their in-ring success as a team, Hangman just couldn't see himself with the Dark Order. That wasn't, however, their fault, as on the January 20th, 2021 episode of Dynamite, Adam stated himself that he couldn't join any group because of his traumatic experience with the Elite. That's why, at its core, Hangman's story was driven by a contradiction. He desperately wanted friendship and acceptance, but his own insecurity prevented him from believing he deserved either. When the Elite pushed him away, or when he merely felt they pushed him away, his instinct wasn't to confront them. It was to isolate himself, convince himself he was unwanted, and numb those feelings with alcohol. But unlike the Elite, the Dark Order never expected Hangman to prove himself. They didn't judge him for his drinking, his losses, or his emotional baggage. They simply enjoyed having him around, and they offered something the Elite no longer did: unconditional acceptance. For Adam Page, psychologically, the Dark Order became a safe space given their underdog nature. Around them, Hangman didn't have to live up to the expectations of being the next world champion or Kenny Omega's partner. He could simply be Adam Page, which served as enough of a reason for him to finally unite with the Dark Order. Earlier in the story, Hangman believed he had to carry every failure by himself. Now, for the first time, he had people in his corner who expected nothing in return, and that's exactly what he needed to take on Kenny Omega's AEW. Now, 2021 wasn't only the year of the cleaner, as Page had his own fair share of success throughout the year. Whether it was against someone as in-ring savvy as Ricky Starks, a veteran like Matt Hardy, or powerhouses in Brian Cage and Powerhouse Hobbs, Hangman was undefeated in his journey to become #1 contender. He did suffer one loss to Cage on Dynamite, but he more than avenged it at Double or Nothing, and in the 2021 version of AEW, that kind of hot streak mattered a lot given their ranking system. Conveniently, after defeating a variety of superstars left and right, in June, Adam found himself ranked #2. He was now so close to a world title shot that, in fact, he felt too close. For a complex character like the sad millennial cowboy had been over the past year and a half, the potential title shot came with a sort of PTSD, if you will, given who the champion was. Adam, of course, couldn't admit that he was afraid of potentially facing Kenny and losing again. And when he was asked by Alex Marvez about his thoughts on the upcoming title match between Omega and the #1 ranked guy Jungle Boy, he dodged the question as smoothly as you could imagine by instead giving praise to his new friends from the Dark Order, highlighting their recent successes. For a moment there, Adam Page became the embodiment of the phrase, suffering from success. Here he was, on a roll, picking up win after win and having the time of his life with the people who truly cared about him. And now, after Jungle Boy lost, he moved to the #1 spot in the rankings, which brought him face to face with his old insecurities once again. For as much as he tried, Adam Page just couldn't hide from his earned World Championship match forever. He wanted to avoid it, but he couldn't. Or could he? In line with what his whole AEW journey had been up to that point, nothing was straightforward for Hangman Adam Page. Nothing had come easy, including his championship match against Omega, which seemed like all it needed was the time and place. The story proved to be more complicated than that, and now let's break down why that was the case. On the June 30th episode of Dynamite, the champ, being high on all the success his AEW cleaner run had seen so far, cut a promo completely ignoring the new #1 contender for the title, and instead talked about how there was no competition left for him. Because of that, he started talking about taking a break and going on a hiatus until a real challenger appeared. And instantly, somebody did appear. In fact, Omega found himself standing across 7 competitors at once. None of them, however, were there to challenge the champ themselves. We are, of course, talking about the Dark Order. Their message was simple. They told Kenny that there might be just somebody for him to have a world championship bout against. Mind you, throughout this whole exchange, Adam Page was treated like Lord Voldemort, with his name not being mentioned even once, yet both sides knew exactly who they were talking about. Understandably so, the champion's response was bold and held a lot of truth to it. He rightfully called out Hangman for, and I quote, having no guts to extend the challenge himself, end quote. Moreover, he blatantly stated that Page is afraid of facing Kenny Omega. The #1 ranked Adam Page wasn't present in the ring himself, but after the segment reached its conclusion, he wasted no time letting the Dark Order know how disappointed he was with them stepping up for him. In response to that, the Dark Order encouraged the Cowboy to finally act, with the highlight of their short speech being 2 sentences Alex Reynolds said to wrap it up. Adam, you've waited long enough. This is your time. Hangman has indeed waited long enough, and so has the whole world. On the July 7th episode of Dynamite, history was made when for the first time since Full Gear 2020, the two came face to face. After the Elite ambushed the Dark Order, Adam Page had had enough and cleared the ring until only one other man was left standing. Instead of taking advantage of a perfect setup to hit the buckshot lariat, Hangman realized last second that it would be the easy way out. At the end of the day, across from him was his old friend with whom he had so much history. As much as they had tried to avoid each other for many months, the opportunity was there for the taking. The opportunity to look each other in the eyes for the sake of old days, and more importantly, to prove they were ready for war. And while all of that was great, the title match was not scheduled that night. Instead of running away, however, Hangman was now at the steering wheel, chasing the champion, which brings us to the next week's Dynamite. After Matt Jackson tried to do his best in putting Hangman down in hopes of awakening his old insecurities, Page knew what he was there for and had 2 responses to that. First, a fist to Matt Jackson's face. Second, he officially issued a challenge to the world champion. Omega, who now seemed to be the one trying to avoid their rematch, instead threw a counteroffer. A 5-on-5 elimination tag team match between the Elite and Hanger with the Dark Order, which Adam accepted. After back and forth, Page found himself manipulated into putting his title shot on the line. The champ knew exactly what to say to his ex-tag team partner, and after claiming how much Page was afraid of failing, Adam, without realizing it, was fooled into accepting the deal. But not without taking care of his friends, which made the final stipulation of this big elimination match the following. If Hanger and the Dark Order win, Adam keeps his title shot, and the Dark Order earn an opportunity to challenge the Young Bucks for the tag titles. If they lose, they don't get anything, including Page losing his already earned world title match. This brings us to Fight for the Fallen 2021, an all-or-nothing 10-man tag team elimination match. Things kicked off with a beautiful entrance from Hangman and the Dark Order. That night, the Elite also came up with their own unique way of coming down to the ring, which featured a Space Jam-style entrance. Like warriors having their best meal before the toughest fight, both teams did their best to enjoy the final moments before war. Once the bell rang, the atmosphere completely shifted given how high the stakes were, especially for the babyfaces. The first half of the match was as even as it gets. After Reynolds, Anderson, Stu Grayson, and Gallows were eliminated, each team had 3 men left. Now, whether it was the big heart of Evil Uno or the enormous fan support for John Silver, neither could hang with the trio of Omega and the Bucks. After giving their best, they were both eliminated, setting up a very fitting final stretch. Hangman found himself standing all by himself across the 3 men he had planned to take over the world with back in 2019, mirroring their standoff from Revolution 2020. For the next 6 minutes, Page fought like his life was on the line. Well, maybe not life, but the careers of himself and the Dark Order. While clearly having the deck stacked against him, in the midst of it all, he managed to pin Matt Jackson, which, despite everything going on in his mind at that moment, must have felt incredibly sweet. This was, however, no 2019. Kenny Omega took every chance he could to embrace his cleaner side. He smashed Hangman's head with a title belt, hit the one-winged angel, and once again shattered the dreams of his old friend. As Excalibur mentioned on the broadcast, things had come full circle for Adam, given how he cost the Bucks a title shot a year ago, and now Nick Jackson along with Kenny took away his world title shot. Coming into the show, it felt like nothing could stop the momentum of Hangman, Adam Page, and the Dark Order. From their undeniable chemistry to the enormous support from the AEW fanbase, for a moment, the forever underdogs made everyone believe they had it all figured out, only for Hangman to get pinned by Omega again. After the complete 180 the Dark Order had in 2021, the undefeated streak of Page, and the bond they shared, it felt like Hangman and the Dark Order had no right to lose. Two of AEW's biggest sensations in 2021 had joined forces, only to fall short when it mattered most. The very next week, after the Elite interrupted Hangman, Adam saw it as an opportunity to have a deep conversation with the Bucks. The champ had other plans. After telling Page how big of a failure he is, the Cleaner, along with the rest of the Elite, ambushed the Cowboy, taking advantage of the helplessness of the Dark Order, who had been asked by Hangman not to intrude that night. Before hitting Page with the belt, Omega's last words to him were, and I quote, "I will give you one last look at the thing you'll never possess," end quote, while holding the gold next to Hangman's face. There he was, laying on the canvas with no direction going forward. As much as he tried to hide it, it was clear that Adam Page's main objectives after the two big losses he suffered at All Out 2019 and Full Gear 2020 were securing the World Championship and beating Kenny Omega. Here, he had the opportunity to do both at the same time. Instead, it now started to seem as if it would never happen. Maybe Hangman Adam Page was never destined for greatness. Maybe all he would ever be known for is being the weak link of the otherwise extremely successful group in the Elite. Weeks were going by. Months were going by. Hangman Adam Page was nowhere to be seen while the Cleaner continued thriving. Had the alcohol finally consumed Adam Page? Had he finally admitted to himself that he doesn't belong in Kenny Omega's world? Being the Cowboy, Hangman knew firsthand that horses don't stop. They keep going. This time, he wasn't negotiating with anybody. If there is something Adam Page learned during the summer of 2021, it is that in this business, fists beat words every single time. While begging his old tag team partner for a rematch might have been an option, he knew that to earn his name, he had to dig deeper than that. As a result, he returned on the October 7th episode of Dynamite and entered the Casino Ladder match as the Joker. The winner of that match would earn a guaranteed opportunity at the AEW World Championship. That alone was enough motivation for the anxious millennial cowboy to make things right. And after overcoming Jon Moxley in the final sequence, Hangman regained his momentum and was once again after Omega's gold. Now, it was on. The next week, a new Hangman Adam Page was introduced to the AEW audience, a much more confident and self-aware version of his former self. While fully admitting his shortcomings, including failing to keep his day one promise of becoming world champion, and once again taking responsibility for his Elite exile, he revealed that for the first time in his life, he believed in himself. He closed the promo with one of the most iconic speeches in modern wrestling history, and I quote, "A promise I can make is that at Full Gear, I will give you everything. I will give you my heart, I will give my soul, I will give you every fiber of my being. I will give you my blood, my sweat, and one way or another, I feel like I will give you my tears. The one thing I am 100% sure about is that at Full Gear, I will give you cowboy shit." End quote. On the October 27th episode of Dynamite, the world of the Elite began to crumble. The all-star team of Omega, Adam Cole, and the Young Bucks suffered a crucial loss ahead of the PPV to the Dark Order with the help of none other than the Cowboy himself. Kenny Omega's smile was nowhere to be found, while Adam Page continued his comeback story. The next week, Hangman had the chance to hold Kenny's gold and made sure the champion knew he only had 10 days left. The balance seemed to shift, with Adam now being the more confident of the two. With the way things had been going for the Cleaner, a last-minute momentum shift was crucial. Getting into Hangman's head and standing over his beaten body one more time before their big fight was something Omega desperately needed. That leads us to their memorable contract signing on the final episode of Dynamite before Full Gear. Sitting across from each other, there was no need to hold anything back. It was time for one of the most brutal promo exchanges ever. Or at least, that is what fans would usually expect from a contract signing that big. Here, the story was both highly complicated and very simple. There were two men who had known each other for quite a few years. What makes this story fascinating is that betrayal was never part of it. Instead, it was a slow erosion of trust, mainly driven by Adam's self-doubt. This is what makes this contract signing so unique. Both men were speaking nothing but facts. As much as fans hated to admit it, Kenny was calling Adam out for all the right reasons. Despite all the inner struggles Adam was going through, the Elite never gave up on him. Adam Page had given up on himself. In response, for the first time ever, Hangman struck a chord Kenny thought nobody else had an idea of. Despite beating Page a year earlier, Omega left the arena that night afraid of how close Hangman was to exposing the god of pro wrestling. He wanted anything but Hangman to become better, because otherwise Kenny Omega would become inferior to Adam Page, and that was something the Cleaner could not allow. Kenny then claimed how wrong Adam was and unexpectedly initiated a handshake, which turned out to be a setup, as Adam Page was attacked by Don Callis disguised as a cameraman. Seeing Hangman's head dripping in blood, El Campeón couldn't help himself but sign the contract with Adam's blood. The statement was made. Too bad Kenny didn't know Adam had a weapon of his own, something he couldn't predict. Ahead of their match, Page took care of unfinished business, something he likely intended to say to Nick and Matt on that August 4th episode of Dynamite before being interrupted by Omega. This time, to ensure nobody could interrupt him, he approached the Bucks backstage. He formally apologized for throwing away their friendship, but stated that since he cost them a tag title opportunity and they cost him a world title opportunity, they were now even. And as sincere as the apology was, he had to do what he had to do, which was warn the Bucks to stay away from his title match against Kenny. Matt and Nick had nothing to say, leaving everyone wondering where they stood. Mentor versus protege. The Bullet Club leader versus his loyal soldier. AEW's very best versus an underdog. 1 year ago, they battled as friends. Since then, both men had done a 180. Kenny Omega embracing his old ways and becoming the opposite of what he was in 2019 to 2020, while Hangman Page's cowboy shit movement became the hottest thing in the company. Neither could afford to lose for the sake of their egos, yet only one could win. Despite Adam's warning, the Bucks were present at ringside. After Page hit the one-winged angel, he already had the champion where he wanted him. While that wasn't enough, the damage was done, and all that was left was Buckshot Lariat. At that moment, the Bucks became suspiciously active. First, while getting ready to hit the buckshot, Nick Jackson was about to do the very same thing Hangman did to cost them their #1 contenders match back in the day. For whatever reason, he hesitated. Rest assured, Matt would be there to save the day for Kenny, right? It was at that point the Bucks realized there was no point in living a lie. While they could have helped Omega retain and continue his dominant run as the leader of the Elite, if there was ever a time for forgiveness, it was that night in Minneapolis. Instead of grabbing Hangman's leg, Matt simply nodded to him, which made for the perfect ending of the story. The second buckshot lariat in a row connected, and a new AEW World Champion was crowned. The Dark Order rushed to the ring, offering the new champion a cold one, only for Hangman to refuse it and instead embrace them. A moment that was deeply symbolic, given how at one point he preferred the booze over his elite brothers, and now it seemed that nothing was more important to him than his new friends. Needless to say, the story had come full circle on many levels. Hangman's issues with the Bucks were settled. He had avenged his loss to Kenny at the same PPV 1 year later, and finally proved himself worthy of leading the company. In 2021, business for AEW was booming, from the incredible quality of the product to huge signings and partnerships with multiple promotions across the globe. But no matter the amount of big names on the lot or the spectacular matches, nothing builds a brand's identity better than a larger-than-life rivalry. For AEW in its early days, that defining storyline was the Elite, particularly Hangman versus Omega. Besides putting AEW on the map, this feud produced one of the most magnificent characters in all of professional wrestling. Relatability is the name of the game in this industry, and the character of Hangman Adam Page was built on traits that are interchangeable with human nature. Whether it is self-doubt, insecurity, or harmful addiction used in hopes of avoiding a harsh reality, Hangman reflected something real. At the same time, the story of the anxious millennial cowboy showcased the incredible ability to bounce back and prove the world wrong. No matter who your worst enemy is, whether it is someone you once perceived as a friend or even yourself, the ability to acknowledge you are not perfect and were likely at one point wrong is what separates those who achieve greatness from those who bathe in their own misery. For Hangman, the ability to stand out was critical. With the presence of big names like Punk, Jericho, Cody, Danielson, and Adam Cole, along with up-and-coming sensations such as MJF and Ricky Starks, AEW in 2021 was thriving in terms of personalities. The only way for Adam Page to break through was by crafting an all-time storyline. And as great as it was seeing the rise of AEW's heart and soul, we also have to give our flowers to Kenny "by God" Omega. For a man born to be the face of AEW since day one, he made the selfless decision to step away from the main spotlight to be there for one of his best friends, who after his loss at All Out 2019 desperately needed emotional support, as much as Hangman didn't want to admit it. While being perfectly capable of challenging for the world title himself, he instead aligned with Page because he believed it was the right thing to do. And after Hangman completely lost his way in 2020, Kenny couldn't help but feel disappointment toward his old friend, and made the best out of the situation by betting on his greatness as a singles competitor, which led to the legendary belt collector run across multiple promotions. By defeating world-class talent such as Moxley, Rey Fenix, Christian Cage, Rich Swann, and others, Kenny elevated the AEW world title to new heights, which in turn benefited Hangman even more. The ability to produce a 2-year-long compelling storyline is something not every creative team is capable of pulling off. Every look, every hesitation, every subtle interaction had its payoff down the line. As a result, this rivalry legitimized AEW as a true storytelling company. Rather than relying on abrupt heel turns or manufactured conflict, AEW allowed its characters to evolve naturally over the course of 2 years, making every victory and every heartbreak feel meaningful. To summarize, for Hangman Page, this story transformed him from an insecure supporting player into the emotional centerpiece of the promotion. His victory at Full Gear 2021 wasn't simply the culmination of a title chase. It was the completion of a personal journey fans had watched unfold since the company's inception. Meanwhile, KennyOmega delivered arguably the finest character work of his career, evolving from a respected leader into an obsessive champion willing to sacrifice almost anything in pursuit of greatness. Together, they reminded wrestling fans what long-term storytelling can accomplish when character comes before spectacle. Friendships were tested, alliances were broken, and careers were defined. But beneath it all was a simple, deeply human story about friendship, insecurity, ambition, and self-belief. Years later, it remains the rivalry most closely associated with AEW's formative years, and for many, the gold standard of storytelling done right.